You've been to countless speech therapy appointments. You've practiced your sounds at home. You've done every technique the speech therapist recommends. By this point, you've probably logged countless hours, thousands of dollars. Maybe you've even done a tongue tie or a lip tie, and you've had those revised, and yet your child is still struggling to communicate. They're plateaued, they're feeling frustrated, you're feeling frustrated. And at the same time, you might see other kids are chattering away that are the same age, and you just want your child to join. If you're wondering what might I be missing, this video is for you. You see, in the US, nearly 1 in 12 kids have a voice, a speech, a language, or a swallowing disorder. Majority of the time, they receive the traditional approach. This is focusing more on the output, what the speech muscles are doing to try to make sounds. What is less talked about, however, is what about the input and the coordination that the brain and the sensory nervous system have to do to make speech happen in the first place. So if you found that you've done a lot of speech drills, you've tried to help them coordinate their muscles better, but you haven't addressed the nervous system and the foundation of how speech develops, this video is for you, because a lot of times speech delays, other communication challenges, if we can get to the input and the processing, and I'm going to show you that in a moment, suddenly the output and the expression comes way better. So if you found that your kiddo hasn't responded well to traditional speech therapists, that's what we're going to dive into, is this 3-step neurological process. So I want to open up my iPad here and tell you what that process is. So in order for speech to happen and get through a delay or really break through with speech progress with your kiddo, step 1 is there needs to be good input into the brain. So in the world of speech, this would be auditory processing. There might be visual, where they see other people talking and communicating, but there needs to be good input in. Step 2, the brain needs to process things. And so if the brain isn't processing things well, it's going to have a hard time telling the body what to do. Step 3 is the motor output. This is where the muscles are coordinated, where the brain says, I want you to move your lips and your tongue and your jaw and make this sound. I want you to vibrate your vocal cords in a certain way. And so back when my wife was a speech therapist, we had a lot of conversations about what is happening with these kiddos. As an example, what she would find is that if she would put a kiddo on a scooter board and roll around and play with them, they would have much better results in speech therapy. Why was this? Well, what she found is that in that case, she was actually putting organizing input into the brain. So now when she tried to work on this motor output and sounds and the exercises, she had much better results. So if your kiddo is struggling with speech therapy, odds are that it's more than just the motor layer that's the issue. You see, if your kiddo has excelled really quickly through speech therapy, one, you're probably not watching this video, but odds are then it is more that third layer, that motor output. However, if there's a processing delay, for example, if the brain isn't processing information quickly enough, it can be really hard and feel like you're just always going uphill if you're working only on the motor side of things. I remember back in the early days, my wife had referred someone to me who had a 15-second processing delay, this little girl, and so if you asked her her name, you'd have to count in that long before she would answer. Once we started working with her nervous system and adjusting her, that processing delay got cut into a third. So now her brain was able to process information more quickly. We have an autistic boy just started adjusting a week and a half ago, and mom said already he's starting to form like new sounds and new combinations of words that he wasn't doing before. So why did this happen? Is what we're looking for is, what if instead of good info going into the brain, what if there's actually stress going into the brain in the first place? So if the auditory, if the visual system, if they're not getting good info into the brain, or if there's stress going into the brain might be processing things perfectly, but stress in means stress out. So now, of course, the motor system, that's step 3, is going to be discoordinated and disorganized. So where does this often come from is what we see is, we call it the perfect storm. If there's stress during labor, and delivery, it can start to throw off these nerves that come from the upper neck. These are the nerves that have the most to do with coordinating speech. If your kiddo didn't nurse well, if they couldn't do suck, swallow, if they couldn't latch, if you noticed that they didn't have good coordination then, a lot of times that's an early clue that now as they get a little bit later, the same area that needs to be coordinated is going to still be offline. So one of the key nerves that actually comes from the neck is called the vagus nerve, and there's a branch called the recurrent laryngeal branch, which goes to the voice box, the larynx, that helps coordinate everything here. So if that nerve specifically is off, it's going to create the body to have a really tough time coordinating these muscles and these motor movements. So that's what we look for in our office, is if there is stress going in, what we want to do is start to clear out that stress, start to put some calm and organization into the brain. Make sure that vagus nerve is online, because if that isn't online, it's really tough for growth and development to occur. So if that resonates, if you find your child, one, is plateaued with speech therapy, or two, has a bigger challenge like apraxia, as I mentioned in the beginning, where they just can't, you feel like you're kind of stuck and you're plateaued, that'd be a great time to look into neurological chiropractic, because then we can focus on the input and on the processing. And as a result, suddenly the motor output can go a lot easier.